former Royal Navy and NATO commander. Chris, thank you so much for joining us here on the show today. We've had a bit of a change in tune, haven't we, over the last 24 or 48 hours, both from the Foreign Secretary David Cameron, who over the weekend issued a joint statement with his equivalent in Germany. Ben Wallace, the former Defence Secretary, wrote yesterday in The Telegraph with what I thought was actually some pretty aggressive language about the behaviour, in his view, of the Israelis, and particularly Benjamin Netanyahu. And also the Prime Minister today has come out and called, in line with these other calls, for a sustained ceasefire in Gaza. First of all, what does a sustained ceasefire mean?
Well, a sustainable ceasefire is a platitude. I think everybody knows that actually any ceasefire is bound to be broken in the current circumstances. And it's a way of, I think, mitigating criticism that we're not doing enough to restrain what is perceived as something Israel is doing in Gaza. I think we've got to be really careful here, Jake, because there's a lot of propaganda, disinformation, and false information out there that is, I'm afraid, affecting people's attitudes on both sides. And we've got to establish what is really going on the ground, to tell you the truth, before we make decisions about whether we support or whether we oppose what is going on in a very complex, difficult situation.
Dr. Parry, I mean, I wonder if, did you take the opportunity to read Ben Wallace's article yesterday in The Telegraph, where he used phrases like Israel is visiting collective punishment on Gazans, which, as we know, is linked to breaches potentially of conventions and often to war crimes. He talked about Netanyahu pursuing a policy of rage. Was Ben Wallace right to do that, or do you think Ben doesn't know what's happening on the ground?
Well, I did read the article, as I do everything else I talk about. But the issue is, as I said, I think there is a lot of emotion flying around. After what happened on the 7th of October, there's emotion on the Israeli side. We always see emotion whenever the Palestinians are involved. I'm afraid it's contagious. I think words like collective punishment, war crimes, all that sort of thing are very unhelpful in this situation, because it's not a normal situation. We're not seeing Israel taking on another state. We're not seeing Hamas and its allies in Gaza playing by any sort of rules at all, except realpolitik. And I'm afraid whatever people say right now are not going to really affect the way the Israelis want to be able to pursue their objectives in this campaign. At the end of the day, they want justice for the victims of the 7th of October. They want to eradicate Hamas. And also they want the basis for a sustainable peace and some security for themselves after what has been a strategic shock for the country.
Just to be absolutely clear, Ben Wallace didn't say that Israel had committed war crimes, just to be absolutely clear, but he used language that by others has been connected to it following his article.
Can I say that collective punishment is a war crime? So if you use the term collective punishment, then I'm afraid he did wander into that space.
Well, he did. I started off by saying I thought he'd used some pretty extraordinary language. That is certainly one of the things that he said. Will Israel be concerned? Because effectively we've seen a change of rhetoric and language out of the United States, out of Britain, out of Germany. The sort of pro-Israel coalition, the countries that would traditionally support them in their determination to protect their freedom and liberty and the security of Israel, does seem to be fracturing that coalition of support for them. Will they be concerned about that? And do you think it will lead to a change in their behaviour, or are they going to pursue their own objectives almost regardless of what their traditional allies have to say about it?
Well, I think we're seeing the same fracturing of opinion over Israel that we're seeing over Ukraine at the moment. If we are to maintain our freedoms and liberties in the free world, we actually have to stand on our principles and say what is right, what is wrong here. And I think where things are right, we have to give it their full support. Do I think it's going to affect in any way the Israeli government's approach? No, I don't. As I said, it was a strategic shock, rather like Pearl Harbor or 9/11 on the 7th of October. They feel vulnerable. They detect that their opponents think that they're vulnerable. And of course, they're not just facing Hamas at the moment. They're facing threats possibly from Hezbollah, in the north. Their ships have been attacked in the Red Sea. And of course, Iran is standing behind all these proxies, waiting to pounce if they can.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Moving actually on to the Red Sea, we see that BP has suspended shipments through the Red Sea yesterday after an attack on one of its cargo ships by Houthi rebels. How worried should we be about that in terms of the choking up of that waterway, and particularly the global supply chain of the supply chain for fuel into the UK and the rest of the world?
Well, we should be very worried. In a book in 2014, I said that the sea is the physical equivalent of the World Wide Web, and it physically connects us to globalization of commodities and also energy supplies as well. And our opponents know this very well. If you remember when Russia invaded Ukraine, gas and oil prices shot up immediately. Iran has realized this, and by encouraging the Houthi rebels to as you say, close or indeed inhibit the choke point that is the Bab el-Mandeb and the Red Sea, they're hoping to put pressure on the free world in relation to oil and gas. It's significant that the Iranians aren't putting pressure on the Straits of Hormuz because most of the oil and gas goes to China, their major ally. So this is a determined attempt to put pressure on the free world by putting up prices of oil and gas and diverting ships away from the Red Sea. Of course, it also puts pressure on Egypt because quite a proportion of its revenues come from ships going through the Suez Canal. So this is all part of a plan by, I suspect, Iran. And we're seeing this all the time now, Jake. We know we're facing a loose coalition of authoritarian states in Eurasia. That's Russia, China, Iran, and North Korea. And we're in the foothills, I'm afraid, of strategic competition that in many places could lead to conflict. And part of that strategy from the authoritarian side is to put pressure on our fuel and also our commodity supply lines.
Just to focus on that, this one suspension by BP, I read in the papers today you could see a 3p increase of fuel at the pump within the next fortnight, hitting families as they're looking to fill up their family car and go away for Christmas or go and visit relatives. If this was...
Jake, it's not just BP. I mean, it's Maersk, which is the second biggest shipping company in the world. It's Costco, which is the Chinese one. So it's not just going to be shortages of oil and gas. It's going to be other commodities and things like that as well. If the Houthis had timed better, they could have hit Christmas.
Chris, well, exactly. And if this is, sustained, I guess we ain't seen nothing yet in terms of fuel prices going up and those other squeeze on commodities.
Yeah, a lot of it will be diverted around the Cape. But I should stress, Jake, that this is not just going to happen here. It's going to happen in other places as well, where Russia, China, Iran think they can put pressure on the free world. Because, we rely on the sea, as I said, as the physical equivalent of the World Wide Web. It is the engine of globalization. And that's why in the last 400 years, it's been very important for the democracies to remain strong at sea. That's what's happening. The Eurasian autocrats realize they can dominate Eurasia, but they need to dominate the sea if they're going to strangle our economies. And as they say themselves, de-Americanize the world and its institutions.
So we may already, Chris, be fighting an economic third world war, which I'm sorry is a terribly depressing note to finish on. Thank you, Chris, for